The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Chen's Auto Repair, where Marcus wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag and surveyed the modest garage that had become his world. 3 bays, 2 of them empty, tools that had seen better decades, and a reputation built one honest repair at a time. It wasn't the aerospace engineering lab where he'd once designed components for commercial aircraft, but it was his, and more importantly, it was safe. The familiar sound of his 80-year-old daughter Lily's school bus rumbling past the front window made him glance at the clock. 3:30. She'd be walking through that door in exactly 12 minutes, backpack bouncing, ready to tell him about her day, while she did homework at the small desk he'd set up in the corner office. Their routine had become sacred over the past 2 years, ever since the accident changed everything. Marcus was reaching for his coffee mug when the desperate squeal of brakes and the angry hiss of escaping steam shattered the afternoon quiet. A battered sedan lurched into his driveway, white smoke pouring from under the hood like a distress signal. The engine gave one final, violent shudder before falling silent. The driver's door flew open and a woman stumbled out, her professional blazer wrinkled, her dark hair escaping from what had once been a neat ponytail. Elena Rodriguez looked like she'd been fighting a losing battle with the universe, and from the way she stared at her smoking car, the universe was winning. 2 children emerged from the back seat, a boy about 6 clutching a worn stuffed elephant, and a girl slightly older holding his hand with protective determination. Both wore the careful expressions of kids who'd learned that grown-up problems weren't always fixable with hugs and Band-Aids. Elena pressed her palms against her temples and took a shaky breath before approaching Marcus. Her voice carried the brittle edge of someone trying very hard not to cry. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my car just died and I have a job interview in 2 hours and I don't know what to do." Marcus set down his mug and walked closer, noting the way she held herself with dignity despite the obvious stress. Her children stayed close but quiet, trained in the art of not making things worse when Mom was having a crisis. "Let's take a look," Marcus said simply, popping the hood release. Steam billowed out as he lifted it, and he waved it away with practiced patience. The engine bay told a story of deferred maintenance and wishful thinking. The transmission fluid was dark as coffee, the radiator hose had a slow leak, and the serpentine belt looked ready to snap. Elena watched him examine the engine with the intensity of someone whose entire future might depend on his diagnosis. "How bad is it?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Marcus straightened, choosing his words carefully. "The transmission's in rough shape. The cooling system needs work. It's going to take some time to fix properly." The hope in Elena's eyes flickered and died. She turned away, one hand covering her mouth, and Marcus could see her shoulders beginning to shake. The older child, the girl, moved closer to her mother with an instinctive protectiveness that reminded Marcus painfully of his own daughter. "Mom," the girl whispered, tugging gently at Elena's blazer, "it's okay. We'll figure it out." Elena knelt down and pulled both children into a fierce hug, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I know, baby. Mama always figures it out." Marcus watched this moment of quiet courage and felt something shift in his chest. He'd seen plenty of people in difficult situations over the years, but there was something about Elena's determination to stay strong for her kids that resonated deeply. Maybe it was the way the little boy clutched his stuffed elephant, or how the girl seemed older than her years. Maybe it was the simple recognition of a parent doing whatever it took to hold things together. "What kind of job interview?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena looked up, surprised by the question. "Administrative assistant at Morrison Industries. It's not glamorous, but it's full-time with benefits. And they said they're looking for someone who can start immediately." She gestured helplessly at the disabled car. Marcus nodded slowly, already making calculations in his head. Not about cost or time, but about the kind of person Elena seemed to be and the kind of person he wanted to remain despite everything that had happened to him. Some decisions weren't about business sense or profit margins. Sometimes they were about recognizing when the universe put someone in your path who needed exactly what you had to offer. I'll get you to that interview, he said, the words coming out with quiet certainty. And I'll fix your car. Elena blinked, clearly not trusting what she'd heard. I should tell you, I don't have much money right now. I can pay you something, but not until next week, and probably not what it's really worth. Marcus was already walking back toward his toolbox, his mind shifting into the focused state that had once made him one of the most sought-after engineers in aerospace. We'll work something out, he said over his shoulder. Right now, let's get you where you need to be. Elena's eyes widened with disbelief and something that might have been hope. You'd really do that? Even though I can't pay you properly right now. Marcus was already pulling tools from his cabinet, his movements efficient and purposeful. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't about money, he said, selecting a diagnostic scanner that looked far more sophisticated than anything else in the modest garage. Tell me about this job. What makes it so important? Elena settled her children on a clean bench near the office area, where they could stay out of the way but remain close. The boy, still clutching his stuffed elephant, watched Marcus with curious eyes while his sister maintained her protective vigil. It's my chance to finally get stable, Elena explained, her voice growing stronger as she talked about something she could control. I've been working 3 part-time jobs since my divorce, trying to keep us afloat. This position offers health insurance, steady hours, and enough pay that I wouldn't have to choose between groceries and rent anymore. Marcus connected the scanner to the car's diagnostic port, and immediately the display filled with error codes that would have overwhelmed most mechanics. But his eyes tracked across the information with the methodical precision of someone trained to interpret complex data systems. Years of reading aerospace diagnostic reports had prepared him for far more complicated analysis than a failing transmission. The interview is at Morrison Industries, Marcus asked, already mentally mapping the route and calculating travel time. Yes, the new facility on the east side. I know it's a long shot. There were probably dozens of applicants, and I'm sure most of them have better qualifications than I do. But Mr. Morrison's assistant said something about my application standing out, about my persistence in following up. The scanner beeped softly as it completed its analysis, and Marcus studied the readout with growing understanding. The transmission wasn't just worn, it was suffering from a cascade failure that had started with a simple filter issue and progressed through multiple systems. Most mechanics would have recommended a complete replacement, a repair that would cost more than the car was worth. But Marcus saw patterns in the data that others might miss, inefficiencies that could be corrected with precision adjustments rather than wholesale replacement. It was the same analytical approach he'd used when troubleshooting flight control systems, finding elegant solutions to complex problems. The rumble of an expensive engine interrupted his concentration. A gleaming black SUV pulled into the driveway with the confident arrogance of someone who expected the world to make room. The vehicle dwarfed Elena's modest sedan, its chrome details catching the afternoon light like jewelry. Tony Ricci emerged from the driver's seat with the practiced smile of a man who made his living convincing people they needed things they couldn't afford. His dealership uniform was pressed to military precision, his shoes polished to mirror brightness, and his cologne announced his presence before he spoke a word. Well, Tony said, his voice carrying across the garage with manufactured warmth. Looks like someone's having car trouble. That's unfortunate, but lucky for you, I might be able to help. Elena looked uncertain, glancing between Marcus and the newcomer. Tony's smile widened as he approached, his eyes already assessing her financial situation with the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. Tony Ricci, Ricci's Premium Motors, he announced, extending a business card that Elena accepted reluctantly. I couldn't help but notice your vehicle situation. Let me guess, the local mechanic here is telling you it's going to cost more than the car's worth to fix. Marcus continued working, his jaw tightening slightly as he listened to Tony's pitch. He'd encountered men like this before, smooth talkers who preyed on desperation and turned necessity into profit. I haven't gotten an estimate yet, Elena said carefully, her protective instincts clearly activated by Tony's aggressive charm. Of course not, Tony laughed, gesturing dismissively toward Marcus. But let's be realistic here. You're looking at a backyard mechanic with outdated equipment trying to resurrect a vehicle that's already lived its best life. Meanwhile, I got a beautiful certified pre-owned sedan on my lot that would be perfect for a family like yours. Elena's children watched the exchange with wide eyes, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand the adult complexities at play. The little boy's grip on his stuffed elephant tightened, while his sister moved protectively closer to their mother. "I appreciate the offer," Elena said diplomatically, "but I'm not really in a position to take on a car payment right now." Tony's smile never wavered, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Desperation was his specialty, and he'd learned to read the signs with professional accuracy. That's the beauty of my financing program. I work with people in challenging situations all the time. Poor credit, limited income, unexpected expenses. I can get you approved today, and you could drive off my lot within the hour. Marcus looked up from his diagnostic work, meeting Tony's gaze with steady disapproval. She doesn't need a car payment. She needs her car fixed. Tony's laugh was patronizing, designed to make Marcus feel small in front of Elena. "Come on, friend. Be realistic. Look at this thing. The transmission alone is going to cost her more than she paid for the whole car. You're doing her a disservice by even pretending it's worth fixing." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt the familiar surge of frustration that came with being underestimated. Tony saw a small-town mechanic in a modest garage, someone whose opinion carried no weight against the polished confidence of professional sales training. But Marcus had faced down aerospace executives and military contractors. He'd presented technical solutions to rooms full of people whose decisions affected millions of dollars and thousands of lives. Tony Ricci's condescension was nothing compared to the pressure he'd once navigated daily. "I think I can manage," Marcus said quietly, returning his attention to the diagnostic screen where the real solutions lay hidden in the data. Tony's smile turned razor-sharp as he sensed Marcus's quiet resistance. He'd built his reputation on overwhelming objections before they could take root, and this small-town mechanic wasn't going to interfere with a promising sale. "Listen, Elena," Tony said, turning his back to Marcus with deliberate dismissal. "Let me paint you a picture of reality here. Your transmission is shot, probably needs a complete rebuild. That's $3,000 minimum, assuming this guy even knows what he's doing. Then you've got cooling system issues, belt problems, who knows what else is lurking under the hood." Elena shifted uncomfortably, her children sensing the growing tension. The little boy whispered something to his sister, who shook her head and kept her protective gaze fixed on their mother. "But here's what I can do for you," Tony continued, pulling out his phone with theatrical flair. "I've got a 2019 sedan, low miles, excellent condition, fully certified. Normally I'd ask for $3,000 down, but for a hardworking mother like yourself, I can work with whatever you've got. Even if it's just $200, I can get you approved and driving today." Marcus looked up from his diagnostic work, his expression carefully controlled. "What's the monthly payment on that generous offer?" Tony's laugh was dismissive, but there was an edge to it now. "That's between me and my customer, friend. Why don't you focus on your wrenches and let the adults handle the business discussion?" The condescension in Tony's voice was unmistakable, designed to make Marcus feel insignificant while positioning Tony as Elena's savior. But Marcus had spent years in corporate boardrooms where egos and manipulation were far more sophisticated than Tony's heavy-handed approach. "I'm just curious," Marcus said mildly, "what kind of interest rate you're offering someone in Elena's situation." Elena looked between the two men, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of what felt increasingly like a territorial dispute. "Maybe I should hear the details," she said carefully. Tony's smile widened triumphantly. "Of course you should. Smart woman. The payment would be around $450 a month, and yes, the interest rate is a bit higher than bank financing, but that's because I'm taking a risk on someone with challenging credit. Most dealers wouldn't even talk to you." Elena's face went pale. $450 a month? "It's an investment in your future," Tony said smoothly. "Reliable transportation, warranty coverage, the peace of mind that comes with knowing you won't be stranded on the side of the road. Can you really put a price on that kind of security for your family?" Marcus set down his diagnostic scanner with deliberate precision. The manipulation was so transparent, it made him physically uncomfortable, watching someone prey on Elena's desperation with promises that would trap her in debt for years. "That's over $5,000 a year," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the analytical clarity that had once made him invaluable in technical presentations. "For a used car, that's probably worth $12,000. By the time you finish paying it off, you'll have spent twice what it's worth." Tony's friendly mask slipped slightly, revealing the irritation underneath. "Look, mechanic, I don't know how they do business in your little garage here, but in the real world, people understand that financing costs money. Elena's not buying a car. She's buying peace of mind." "Peace of mind," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Or financial stress for the next 5 years?" Elena was doing mental math, her expression growing more troubled by the second. $450 a month would consume nearly half her projected income from the new job, assuming she got it. Add in insurance, gas, and maintenance, and the car payment alone would leave her family barely scraping by. "There must be other options," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Tony sensed her wavering and pressed harder. "Elena, let's be honest here. Your current car is dead. Even if this guy somehow manages to get it running, how long before it breaks down again? How long before you're stranded with your kids, missing work, facing the same crisis all over again?" The fear in Elena's eyes was palpable now, and Marcus could see Tony's strategy working. Create urgency, eliminate alternatives, make the predatory loan seem like the only rational choice. "What if I could guarantee the repair?" Marcus said suddenly, the words surprising even him. Both Tony and Elena stared at him. Tony's expression shifted to amused disbelief, while Elena looked confused. "Guarantee how?" she asked. Marcus straightened, feeling the familiar confidence that came with offering solutions based on genuine expertise rather than sales pressure. "If I can't get your car running reliably, no charge for the work. If it breaks down within the next 6 months due to anything I repair today, I'll fix it free." Tony laughed outright, the sound harsh and mocking. "That's ridiculous. You can't possibly guarantee that piece of junk. What happens when the engine seizes next week or the electrical system fails? Are you going to replace the whole car for free?" "I'm only guaranteeing the work I do," Marcus said calmly. "The transmission repair, the cooling system fix. I've diagnosed the problems, and I know how to solve them properly." "You know how to solve them," Tony repeated with theatrical skepticism. "Right. And I suppose you're going to rebuild a transmission in the next hour and a half." Marcus glanced at the clock on the garage wall, calculating time and complexity with the same systematic approach he'd once used for aircraft maintenance schedules. "I don't need to rebuild it. I need to fix what's actually wrong with it." The distinction was lost on Tony, but Elena was watching Marcus with growing interest. There was something in his quiet confidence that felt different from Tony's aggressive sales pitch, something that suggested genuine knowledge rather than practice manipulation. "This is insane," Tony said, his patience finally cracking. "Elena, you're going to trust your family's future to some guy with a garage instead of working with an established business that's been serving this community for 15 years. Elena looked at her children, then at her smoking car, then at Marcus, who was already pulling specialized tools from his cabinet with the focused intensity of someone who'd found the right solution to a complex problem. The sound of small feet on concrete broke the tension as Lily Chun bounded through the garage entrance, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders and her face bright with the particular joy that came from seeing her father after a day apart. She stopped short when she noticed the adults clustered around the smoking car, her 80-year-old instincts immediately reading the stress in the room. "Hi, Daddy," she said, approaching Marcus with the careful politeness she'd learned to use when he had customers. "Is everything okay?" Marcus's entire demeanor softened as he knelt to her level, his hands automatically reaching to smooth her wind-blown hair. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. This is Mrs. Rodriguez and her children. Their car broke down, and I'm going to help fix it." Lily studied Elena's kids with the frank curiosity of childhood, taking in the boy's clutched elephant and his sister's protective stance. "Hi," she said with a small wave. "I'm Lily. What are your names?" The older girl glanced at her mother for permission before answering. I'm Sophia, and this is my brother Diego. That's a cool elephant, Lily observed, addressing Diego directly. Does he have a name? Diego looked up at his sister, who nodded encouragingly. Peanut, he whispered, holding the worn toy a little tighter. Tony watched this interaction with barely concealed impatience, clearly frustrated by the interruption to his sales pitch. He checked his expensive watch with theatrical emphasis, a gesture designed to create urgency. Elena, I hate to pressure you, but my dealership closes at 6, and if we're going to get your paperwork processed today, we really need to move on this, he said, his voice carrying just enough manufactured concern to mask the manipulation. Marcus stood slowly, one hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. Lily, why don't you take Sophia and Diego to the office and show them your homework desk? Maybe they'd like some juice boxes from the mini fridge. Lily's face lit up with the responsibility of being a hostess. We have apple and grape, she announced to the other children. And Daddy keeps crackers in the desk drawer for when I get hungry. As the children migrated toward the small office space, their voices creating a bubble of normalcy in the tense atmosphere, Elena watched Marcus with growing recognition of something she couldn't quite name. There was a gentleness in how he interacted with all the children, not just his own, that spoke to character rather than performance. You don't have to decide right now, Marcus said to Elena, his voice quiet enough that Tony had a strain to hear. But if you want to let me try, I think I can have you back on the road in time for your interview. Tony's laugh was sharp with frustration. This is ridiculous. Elena, you're going to risk everything on the word of the guy who works out of a garage that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 1980s? The dismissal stung more than Marcus expected, perhaps because it wasn't entirely wrong. His garage was modest, his equipment functional rather than flashy. To someone like Tony, who measured worth in chrome and marketing budgets, Marcus's operation probably did look inadequate. But Marcus had learned long ago that the most important work often happened in unremarkable places. Some of his greatest engineering breakthroughs had occurred in cluttered labs that bore no resemblance to the polished corporate spaces where presentations were made. The quality of thinking mattered more than the quality of surroundings. The equipment may be old, Marcus said carefully, but experience isn't something you can buy at a dealership. Experience, Tony repeated mockingly. Right. And what exactly is your experience with transmission work? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of his hidden past pressing against his carefully maintained privacy. How could he explain that he'd spent years troubleshooting systems far more complex than automotive transmissions? That hydraulic control systems were hydraulic control systems, whether they were managing aircraft landing gear or gear shifts in a sedan. I've worked on a few, he said simply, turning back toward Elena's car. From the office came the sound of children's laughter, Lily's voice mixing with Sophia and Diego's as they discovered shared interests despite their different circumstances. The sound made Elena smile for the first time since arriving, a genuine expression that transformed her worried features. They sound happy, she observed, glancing toward the office where her children were experiencing a moment of normalcy in what had been a crisis-filled day. Lily loves having other kids around, Marcus said, popping the hood of Elena's car again. It gets lonely for her sometimes, being here with just me. There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that suggested deeper stories, that made Elena study his profile as he examined the engine bay. She noticed details now that she'd missed in her initial panic. The precision of his movements, the way his hands seemed to know exactly where to look, the quiet confidence that had nothing to do with showmanship. What did you learn about cars? She asked. Marcus paused, his hands stilling on the diagnostic connections. It was a simple question that led to complicated answers, paths that wound through grief and guilt and choices made in the aftermath of losing everything that mattered. Different places, he said finally. You pick things up over time. Tony made a sound of disgust. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Bagay answers, no credentials, no certifications. Elena, when you're trusting someone with your family's safety, don't you think you deserve to know their qualifications? Elena looked between the two men, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time since her car had broken down. Tony, with his pressed uniform and polished confidence, representing the world of contracts and monthly payments and institutional reliability. Marcus, with his oil-stained clothes and quiet competence, offering help without guarantees except his own word and skill. In the office, Lily was explaining her math homework to Sophia and Diego, her young voice patient and encouraging as she shared her snacks with children she'd just met. The kindness was unconscious, learned behavior that spoke to the kind of person who had raised her. "I think," Elena said slowly, "I'd like to let Mr. Chen try." Tony's face flushed red with indignation as Elena's words sank in. He'd invested 20 minutes in what should have been an easy sale, a desperate customer with limited options who should have jumped at his financing offer despite its predatory terms. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "When this piece of junk breaks down again next week, don't come crying to me. I offered you a real solution, and you're choosing to trust a backyard mechanic over a legitimate business." Elena squared her shoulders, finding strength in her decision. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Ricci, but I've made up my mind." Tony gathered his business cards with sharp, aggressive movements, his professional facade cracking to reveal the frustration underneath. "Fine, but when you're stuck on the side of the highway with 2 kids in the back seat, remember that you had a chance to do this the smart way." He stalked toward his SUV, pausing at the driver's door to deliver one final shot. "Chen, I hope you know what you're doing. Because if you can't deliver on these promises, you're going to destroy this woman's life." The SUV's engine roared to life with unnecessary aggression, and Tony peeled out of the driveway with the petulance of a man unaccustomed to losing sales to someone he considered beneath him. In the sudden quiet that followed his departure, Marcus and Elena stood beside her disabled car, the weight of the decision settling between them. From the office came the continued chatter of children getting to know each other, their voices a reminder of what was at stake. "I hope I made the right choice," Elena said softly, uncertainty creeping in her voice now that Tony's pressure tactics were gone. Marcus looked at her with the steady gaze of someone who understood the courage it took to trust a stranger when everything important hung in the balance. "You did. I won't let you down." He meant it. Whatever it took, whatever hours he had to work, whatever corners he had to cut in his own life, Elena would make that interview. Not because he needed the business or wanted to prove Tony wrong, but because sometimes the universe put people in your path who needed exactly what you had to offer. "What do you need me to do?" Elena asked, rolling up her sleeves with determined practicality. "Actually, nothing," Marcus said, already gathering tools with systematic efficiency. "This is going to be technical work, and it'll go faster if I can focus completely. Why don't you spend some time with the kids? They've had a stressful afternoon." Elena nodded, understanding dismissed when she heard it. But Marcus's tone was respectful rather than condescending. He wasn't trying to exclude her from some male domain of mechanical expertise. He was simply being honest about the work ahead. As Elena joined the children in the office, Marcus turned his full attention to the diagnostic data still displayed on his scanner. The transmission's problems were complex but not mysterious, a cascade of failures that most mechanics would address by replacing entire assemblies. But Marcus saw inefficiencies in mechanical relationships that suggested more elegant solutions. He began with the hydraulic control system, accessing components that required removing half the engine bay's peripheral equipment. Most mechanics avoided this level of disassembly because the labor costs made it uneconomical, but Marcus wasn't calculating billable hours. He was solving a problem with a thoroughness that had once made him invaluable in aerospace applications. The work was meditative in its complexity, each component revealing new information about the system's overall health. Marcus found himself falling into the focused state that had always been his greatest strength as an engineer, where time became fluid and problems resolved themselves into logical sequences of cause and effect. As he worked, he became aware of Elena watching him through the office window, her expression thoughtful and increasingly curious. She was seeing something in his methodology that didn't match her expectations of automotive repair, a precision and systematic approach that suggested training far beyond what most mechanics possessed. Marcus removed the transmission's valve body with movements that spoke of deep familiarity with hydraulic systems. His hands knew exactly which bolts to loosen in which sequence, how to support components during removal, where to look for the subtle signs of wear that indicated root causes rather than symptoms. The valve body itself told the story of the transmission's decline. Clogged passages, worn seals, contaminated fluid that had turned abrasive over thousands of miles of deferred maintenance. But none of it was beyond repair for someone who understood the underlying engineering principles. Elena appeared beside him as he laid out components on a clean work surface, each piece positioned with a methodical organization of someone accustomed to complex assembly procedures. "I've never seen anyone take apart a transmission like that," she said quietly, careful not to interrupt his concentration. Marcus glanced up, suddenly conscious of how his approach might appear to someone unfamiliar with systems engineering. "It's all connected," he said simply. "You have to understand the relationships between components to fix the root problems instead of just treating symptoms. Where did you learn to do this?" The question was gentle but persistent, and Marcus felt the familiar tension between his desire for privacy and Elena's natural curiosity about someone she'd chosen to trust with her family's immediate future. "Engineering school, mostly," he said, focusing on cleaning valve body passages with the kind of precision that bordered on obsessive. "Different applications, same principles." Elena watched him work for several more minutes, noting details that accumulated into a larger picture. The sophisticated diagnostic equipment that seemed out of place in a modest garage. The technical vocabulary that slipped naturally into his explanations. The systematic approach that suggested training in complex systems analysis. "You weren't always a mechanic," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus's hands paused in their work, and for a moment, the only sounds were the children's voices from the office and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. When he looked up, his expression carried the weight of stories he wasn't ready to tell. "No," he said quietly. "I wasn't." The confession hung in the air between them, creating a moment of shared vulnerability that neither had expected. Elena studied Marcus's profile as he returned his attention to the transmission components, understanding now why his approach felt so different from what she'd imagined automotive repair would look like. "What kind of engineering?" she asked gently, sensing that pushing too hard might cause him to retreat back into privacy. Marcus continued working, his hands steady despite the personal territory the conversation had entered. "Aerospace. Flight systems, mostly. Hydraulic controls, navigation equipment, safety protocols." The revelation reframed everything Elena had observed over the past hour. The sophisticated diagnostic equipment, the systematic approach, the quiet confidence when faced with complex mechanical problems. Marcus wasn't just a mechanic who'd picked up some advanced techniques. He was an engineer applying aerospace-level precision to automotive repair. "That's incredible," Elena said, genuine admiration in her voice. "How did you end up here?" The question touched something painful, and Marcus's movements became more deliberate, more controlled. "Sometimes life takes you in directions you never planned," he said carefully. "Sometimes you have to choose what matters most." From the office came Lily's voice explaining something to Sophia and Diego, her tone patient and encouraging. The sound seemed to anchor Marcus, reminding him of why he'd made the choices that brought him to this moment. "She's a wonderful little girl," Elena observed, following his gaze toward the office window. "She's everything," Marcus said simply, and the quiet intensity in his voice revealed more about his motivation than any detailed explanation could have. Elena understood. She recognized the fierce protectiveness of a parent who'd reorganized their entire life around their child's needs, who'd made sacrifices that others might not understand but never questioned because some things were more important than career advancement or personal ambition. "I should let you work," she said, not wanting to intrude further on his concentration or his privacy. But Marcus surprised her by continuing the conversation. "What about you? What's your background before all this? Elena laughed softly, but there was no bitterness in the sound. Nothing as impressive as aerospace engineering. I studied business administration, worked in corporate human resources for a few years. Then life happened, and I've been improvising ever since. Life happening, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That's one way to put it. They worked in companionable silence after that, Elena occasionally handing him tools or holding components while he made precise adjustments. She found herself fascinated by the methodical way he approached each problem, testing connections and measuring tolerances with equipment that seemed far more sophisticated than anything a typical garage would possess. As the sun began to set outside the garage, Marcus reached the final stages of reassembly. Each component went back into place with the reverse precision of its removal, every connection checked and double-checked according to procedures that Elena suspected came from aviation maintenance protocols. There, Marcus said finally, wiping his hands on a clean rag and stepping back to survey his work. Let's see if we solve the right problems. Elena felt her heart rate increase as Marcus turned the key in the ignition. The engine cranked once, twice, then caught with a smooth rumble that sounded nothing like the labored wheezing from earlier in the afternoon. He let it idle for a moment, listening to subtle changes in tone and rhythm that meant something to his trained ear. "How does it sound?" Elena asked, afraid to hope too much. "Good," Marcus said, but she could see him still listening, still monitoring. "Let me check the transmission response." He shifted through the gears methodically, testing the smoothness of each transition. The harsh grinding and hesitation that had characterized the car's final miles were completely gone, replaced by the precise mechanical choreography of a properly functioning system. "Take it for a short drive," Marcus suggested, climbing out of the driver's seat. "Just around the block. See how it feels." Elena slid behind the wheel with cautious optimism, her children gathering around the car with excitement at seeing their familiar transportation apparently restored to health. The engine responded immediately when she pressed the accelerator, the transmission shifting smoothly through its range without any of the previous protest or delay. As she drove slowly around the nearby streets, testing acceleration and braking, Elena found herself almost afraid to believe what was happening. After months of increasingly unreliable transportation, of holding her breath every time she started the car, the smooth operation felt almost miraculous. When she returned to the garage, Marcus was already cleaning his tools with the methodical care of someone who treated equipment as precision instruments rather than disposable items. Lily and her children were waiting by the office, their faces bright with curiosity about the test drive results. "It's perfect," Elena said, her voice slightly breathless with relief and gratitude. "I can't believe how smoothly it's running." Marcus nodded with quiet satisfaction, the expression of someone who'd solved a complex problem correctly on the first attempt. The cooling system repair should prevent the overheating issues, and the transmission work addresses the root causes of the shifting problems. You shouldn't have any more trouble with either system. Elena looked at the clock on the garage wall and felt her heart jump. "The interview," she said suddenly. "I still have 40 minutes. I can actually make it." The realization hit her with stunning force. What had seemed impossible just hours ago was now not only possible, but probable. Her car was running better than it had in months. She had enough time to reach Morrison Industries, and she could walk into that interview with confidence instead of the desperate anxiety of someone whose entire world was falling apart. "Thank you," she said to Marcus, the words inadequate for what she was feeling. "I don't know how to properly thank you for this." Marcus was already shaking his head before she finished speaking. "Just get that job," he said simply. "That's thanks enough." Elena gathered her children quickly, her movements energized by the sudden shift from crisis to opportunity. Sophia and Diego said goodbye to Lily with the polite shyness of children who'd formed a tentative friendship in unusual circumstances, while Lily pressed a small drawing she'd made into Sophia's hand. "For good luck," Lily explained solemnly. "It's our garage, and your car, and everyone's smiling." Elena felt her throat tighten at the gesture, This small kindness from a child who barely knew them, but had absorbed her father's generous spirit. She knelt down to Lily's eye level, her voice gentle but sincere. "Thank you, sweetheart. You and your daddy saved our whole day." As Elena buckled her children into their seats, the familiar routine felt different now. The car that had been a source of anxiety and breakdown worry just hours ago now hummed with reliable confidence. The seats that had witnessed her quiet panic were now filled with the possibility of a better future. "Will we see Lily again?" Diego asked from the back seat, still clutching his elephant, but now also holding a juice box that Lily had insisted he take for the road. "I hope so," Elena said, glancing back at Marcus, who stood in the garage doorway, watching their departure with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd made a real difference in another person's life. The drive to Morrison Industries passed in a blur of nervous anticipation mixed with growing confidence. Elena's car handled the traffic and stoplights with smooth precision, giving her one less thing to worry about as she mentally rehearsed her interview responses. Morrison Industries occupied a gleaming office complex on the east side of town, its modern architecture and landscape grounds speaking to the kind of corporate success that Elena hoped to become part of. She parked in the visitors section, taking a moment to check her appearance in the rearview mirror and gather her courage. "Mama looks pretty," Sophia said loyally from the back seat, her young voice carrying the protective encouragement of a daughter who understood that today was important. "Thank you, baby," Elena replied, smoothing her blazer one final time. "You both behave for me in the waiting room, okay? This won't take long." The reception area was intimidatingly elegant, all glass and chrome, with artistic photographs of the company's industrial projects displayed on pristine walls. Elena announced herself to the receptionist, a poised woman who checked her appointment with professional efficiency. "Ms. Rodriguez for the administrative assistant position," the receptionist confirmed. "Mr. Morrison's assistant will be right with you. Please have a seat." Elena settled into one of the leather chairs, her children flanking her with the patient stillness they'd learned during previous job searches. The waiting room's quiet sophistication felt worlds away from Marcus's modest garage, yet somehow the memory of his quiet competence gave her strength. When her name was called 20 minutes later, Elena followed a smartly dressed assistant down a corridor lined with awards and corporate achievements. The assistant, a woman named Patricia, who moved with the brisk efficiency of someone important, made pleasant conversation as they walked. "I have to say, your follow-up calls really impressed Mr. Morrison," Patricia said, her tone suggesting genuine approval. Persistence is a valuable quality in this business. The interview itself went better than Elena had dared to hope. David Morrison, the company's operations director, was a man in his 50s with the focused energy of someone who'd built success through attention to detail and smart hiring decisions. He asked practical questions about her experience, her availability, her ability to handle multiple priorities under pressure. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison said as the formal interview portion concluded. "We've interviewed several candidates for this position, all with impressive credentials. What sets you apart isn't necessarily your resume, but your determination to be here. Patricia told me about your follow-up calls, how you researched our company, how you made it clear this opportunity mattered to you." Elena felt a flutter of hope mixed with nervous anticipation. "This job would mean everything to my family, Mr. Morrison. Stability, benefits, the chance to build something lasting. I don't take that lightly." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Someone who understands that this isn't just a paycheck, but a partnership. The position involves supporting 3 department heads, managing complex schedules, handling sensitive communications. It requires someone who can think on their feet and adapt to changing priorities." "I've been adapting to changing priorities for 2 years," Elena said with a slight smile. "Single parenthood is excellent training for handling multiple crises simultaneously." Morrison's laugh was genuinely warm. "I imagine it is. Well, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to offer you the position. Full-time, benefits start immediately, salary as discussed. Can you start Monday?" Elena felt the world shift around her, the impossible becoming real in the space of a single sentence. After months of uncertainty, of juggling part-time jobs that barely covered expenses, of lying awake at night wondering how she'd provide for her children, the answer to her prayers was sitting across a polished conference table offering her exactly what she'd hoped for. Yes, she managed, her voice slightly breathless with relief and gratitude. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You won't regret this decision. As she completed the initial paperwork and received her employee handbook, Elena found her thoughts drifting back to Marcus and his quiet promise that morning. If he hadn't fixed her car, if she'd been forced to accept Tony's predatory financing or miss this interview entirely, none of this would have been possible. The drive back toward Marcus's garage was a celebration, her children chattering excitedly in the back seat as Elena explained that their money worries were finally over, that they could stop moving between temporary arrangements and start building something stable. "Can we tell Lily the good news?" Sophia asked, her young mind already planning to share their joy with their new friend. "I think we should," Elena agreed, already planning how to thank Marcus for making this entire day possible. As they pulled into the familiar driveway, Elena noticed that the garage lights were still on despite the late hour. Through the bay windows, she could see Marcus working on another vehicle, his silhouette bent over an engine bay with the same focused concentration she'd witnessed during her own repair. Elena parked beside the garage and stepped out into the evening air, her children tumbling out behind her with the excited energy of kids who had good news to share. The familiar sounds of Marcus working filled the space, metal on metal, and the quiet hum of diagnostic equipment that had seemed so mysterious hours ago, but now felt reassuringly competent. "Mr. Chun," Elena called as she approached the bay, where Marcus was bent over the engine of an older pickup truck. "I wanted to let you know how the interview went." Marcus straightened and turned toward them, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression expectant but careful. He'd invested his afternoon in Elena's success, but he was clearly prepared for disappointment if things hadn't worked out as hoped. "I got the job," Elena said, the words carrying all the relief and gratitude she'd been saving up during the drive back. "Full-time, benefits, everything we talked about. I start Monday." Marcus's face broke into the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him all day, an expression that transformed his quiet features and made him look years younger. "That's fantastic," he said, the warmth in his voice unmistakable. "I'm really happy for you." Lily appeared from the office area where she'd been working on homework, her face lighting up when she saw Sophia and Diego. "You came back," she announced with 80-year-old delight. "Did your mom get the job?" "She did," Sophia said, unconsciously echoing her mother's excitement. "We get to stay in our apartment, and Mom won't have to work 3 different places anymore." The children's celebration was infectious, their joy uncomplicated by the adult understanding of how close things had come to disaster. For them, this was simply a day when good things happened to people they liked, when grown-ups kept their promises and everything worked out the way it should. "I can't thank you enough," Elena said to Marcus, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just fix my car today. You saved my family's future." Marcus shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "You would have figured something out. You're stronger than you think." "Maybe," Elena said, "but I didn't have to find out because you were here." As they talked, neither Elena nor Marcus noticed the black sedan that pulled quietly into the driveway behind Elena's car. The vehicle was expensive but understated, the kind of transportation that spoke to serious money managed with discretion rather than flash. The driver's door opened, and an elegant woman in her 60s emerged, moving with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Victoria Sterling was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested both authority and sophistication. A second car followed close behind, a luxury SUV from which Elena stepped out with nervous energy. But this Elena was different from the desperate mother who'd arrived that afternoon. Her posture was straighter, her expression more confident, though she still carried herself with the careful politeness of someone navigating unfamiliar social territory. "Mom, this is the place I told you about," Elena said, though her voice carried an odd formality that made Marcus look up from his conversation with the children. Victoria Sterling surveyed the modest garage with the analytical gaze of someone who'd built a career on reading situations quickly and accurately. Her expression wasn't dismissive exactly, but it carried the clinical assessment of a person who dealt in facts rather than sentimentality. "So this is where the magic happened," Victoria said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of expensive education and corporate boardrooms. She approached Marcus with the direct confidence of someone accustomed to getting answers to her questions. Elena looked between her mother and Marcus, suddenly seeming younger despite her professional attire. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet my mother, Victoria Sterling." "Mom, this is Marcus Chun, the man I told you about." Marcus felt the conversation shift into territory he hadn't expected, the simple exchange of thanks and good news expanding into something more complex. Victoria Sterling's presence changed the entire dynamic of the garage, her expensive clothes and commanding manner creating a contrast that made his modest operation seem even more humble by comparison. "Ms. Sterling," Marcus said politely, extending a hand that Victoria shook with the brief, firm grip of someone who evaluated people quickly and moved on. "Mr. Chun," Victoria replied, her tone neutral but attentive. "Elena has been telling me about your mechanical expertise. Apparently you accomplished something rather remarkable this afternoon." Marcus glanced at Elena, confusion clear in his expression. "I just fixed her car. It wasn't really that complicated." Victoria's smile was slight but knowing. Elena seems to think otherwise. She described the repair in some detail, particularly your diagnostic approach and the precision of your work. She said it reminded her of the engineering projects I've described to her over the years. The mention of engineering projects caught Marcus's attention, though he wasn't sure why Elena would have shared such specific technical details with her mother or why Victoria would find them significant enough to drive out to his garage on a weekday evening. "What kind of engineering projects?" Marcus asked carefully. Victoria's expression sharpened with interest. "Aerospace, primarily. My company specializes in aircraft systems integration, hydraulic controls, navigation equipment. The kind of work that requires both theoretical knowledge and practical application." Marcus felt something click into place, recognition that went beyond the simple coincidence of shared technical backgrounds. Victoria Sterling wasn't just Elena's mother. She was someone who would understand exactly what kind of expertise had been required to diagnose and repair Elena's transmission with the precision Elena had apparently described. "Sterling Aerospace," Marcus said suddenly, the company name emerging from his memory with startling clarity. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know our work?" Marcus knew their work better than she could have guessed. Sterling Aerospace had been one of the premier contractors for the kind of advanced flight systems he'd once specialized in, their reputation for innovation and precision legendary in the industry. If Victoria Sterling was connected to that company, then Elena's presence in his garage that afternoon had been more than simple coincidence. Victoria's smile widened with genuine interest, the polite mask of corporate courtesy giving way to the focused attention of someone who'd encountered an unexpected opportunity. "More than know our work, I suspect. Elena mentioned that you have an aerospace background." Marcus felt the careful privacy he'd maintained for 2 years beginning to crumble under Victoria's penetrating gaze. This wasn't a casual conversation with a grateful customer's mother. This was a professional evaluation by someone who understood exactly what his background represented. "I used to work in the industry," he said carefully, his instinct for discretion warring with the growing realization that his secret was already partially revealed. Elena described your diagnostic methodology in considerable detail. Victoria continued, her tone sharpening with the precision of someone accustomed to extracting valuable information from reluctant sources. The systematic approach, the sophisticated equipment, the way you identified root causes rather than treating symptoms. That's not typical automotive repair technique. Elena watched the exchange with growing understanding of undercurrents she'd sensed but hadn't fully grasped. Her mother's unexpected interest in visiting the garage, the technical questions she'd asked during their drive here, the way Victoria's demeanor had shifted from polite curiosity to focused assessment. I may have approached it differently than most mechanics would, Marcus acknowledged, trying to maintain some boundary around his personal history while acknowledging the obvious. Victoria pulled out her phone with the smooth efficiency of someone who carried serious resources in her digital contacts. Elena, what was the name you mentioned? The one you thought sounded familiar. Elena looked confused for a moment. Then her expression cleared. Marcus Chun. When I heard his full name, it reminded me of something, but I couldn't place it. Victoria's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced speed, accessing databases and professional networks that most people never knew existed. After a moment, her expression changed from curiosity to recognition to something approaching astonishment. Marcus Chun, she said slowly, looking up from her phone with new respect. Lead engineer on the Phoenix Hydraulic Control System. Primary patent holder for the adaptive response protocols that became industry standard for commercial aviation safety systems. Marcus felt his carefully constructed privacy collapse entirely. The Phoenix project had been his masterwork, a breakthrough in hydraulic system reliability that had been implemented across multiple aircraft manufacturers. His name was attached to patents that had revolutionized flight safety protocols, innovations that had been worth millions in licensing fees and countless lives in improved aircraft reliability. That was a long time ago, he said quietly, the weight of his hidden identity settling heavily in the garage's evening quiet. Victoria stared at him with the expression of someone who'd just discovered a Renaissance master working as a house painter. A long time ago, Marcus, your Phoenix protocols are still being implemented in new aircraft designs. Sterling Aerospace has been licensing your innovations for our latest navigation integration projects. Elena looked between her mother and Marcus with growing amazement. You're famous, she said, the words carrying wonder and confusion in equal measure. In the aerospace world, you're actually famous. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, feeling exposed and uncomfortable under their scrutiny. I left that world behind for good reasons. I'm not looking to go back. But why? Victoria asked, her corporate instincts struggling to comprehend why someone would abandon such valuable expertise. Your innovations were groundbreaking. You were at the top of your field. The answer was too complex and too painful to explain simply, involving choices made in grief and guilt, responsibilities that mattered more than professional recognition, a daughter who needed stability more than her father needed career advancement. Sometimes other things matter more, Marcus said, glancing toward Lily, who was showing Diego and Sophia her collection of technical drawings, her young voice explaining mechanical principles with the unconscious absorption of a child raised around engineering concepts. Victoria followed his gaze and seemed to understand something fundamental about his motivations. Her expression softened slightly, the corporate calculator giving way to someone who recognized the sacrifices that parenthood sometimes required. I understand that family comes first, she said more gently. But Marcus, we need people with your expertise. The aerospace industry is evolving faster than our talent pipeline can keep up with. Engineers with your practical experience and innovative thinking are incredibly rare. I appreciate that, Marcus replied, but I've made my choice. This is my life now. Victoria exchanged a meaningful glance with Elena, some form of silent communication passing between mother and daughter. Elena nodded slightly, as if agreeing to something that hadn't been spoken aloud. What if I told you there might be a way to have both? Victoria said, her voice taking on the persuasive tone of someone who'd built a career on turning obstacles into opportunities. What if you could contribute to aerospace innovation without sacrificing your stability here? Marcus looked skeptical. I don't see how that would work. Remote consulting, Victoria said, her words gaining momentum as she outlined possibilities. Project-specific engineering support. You could work from here, Set your own schedule. Choose your own projects. Sterling Aerospace has been moving toward distributed expertise models, bringing in specialized knowledge on a consulting basis rather than requiring full-time relocation. Elena stepped forward, her expression hopeful but careful. Marcus, what my mother is describing, it could change everything for you. You could use your real skills again while staying exactly where you are. Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling over him, the chance to reclaim a part of himself he'd thought was permanently buried. But the decision involved more than just his own desires. It affected Lily's stability, the careful routine they'd built together, the safe world he'd created to protect them both from the chaos that had driven them here. I'd have to think about it, he said finally. Victoria nodded with the patience of someone who understood that the most valuable decisions couldn't be rushed. Of course. But Marcus, what you've built here isn't just a garage. It's a demonstration of exactly the kind of practical problem-solving that the aerospace industry desperately needs. The sound of an expensive engine roaring into the driveway interrupted the conversation, its aggressive rumble announcing Tony Ricci's return with all the subtlety of a territorial display. His black SUV pulled up behind Victoria's sedan with deliberate intimidation, the vehicle's size and chrome gleaming under the garage's fluorescent lights. Tony emerged from the driver's seat with the confident swagger of someone who expected his second appearance to be more successful than his first. He'd spent the evening stewing over his lost sale, convincing himself that Elena would realize her mistake once reality set in and Marcus inevitably failed to deliver on his promises. "Well," Tony announced, his voice carrying across the garage with practiced authority, "I see we're having a little reunion here. Elena, I figured you'd be calling me by now, ready to discuss that financing deal after your mechanic friend disappointed you." His gaze swept across the scene, taking in Victoria's obvious affluence, Elena's confident posture, and the children playing contentedly in the office area. Something was different from the desperate circumstances he'd left behind that afternoon, but Tony's ego prevented him from recognizing that the change might not work in his favor. "Actually, Tony," Elena said, her voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there during their earlier encounter, "everything worked out perfectly. Marcus got my car running beautifully, I made my interview, and I got the job." Tony's expression flickered with surprise, but he recovered quickly. "Got the job? That's great, congratulations. But you know what they say about used cars and temporary fixes. How long do you think that repair is really going to last? A week? Maybe 2. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his quiet presence somehow managing to command attention despite Tony's loud confidence. "The repair will last as long as any proper transmission overhaul. I guarantee my work." "Your guarantee," Tony repeated with a laugh that carried more edge than humor. "Right. And what exactly is that worth? What happens when this thing breaks down next month and you can't afford to honor your promise?" Victoria had been watching the exchange with the analytical detachment of someone accustomed to evaluating conflict dynamics in professional settings. Now she stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone who rarely needed to raise her voice to command respect. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've been introduced," she said to Tony, her tone polite, but carrying unmistakable undertones of dismissal. "I'm Victoria Sterling, Elena's mother." Tony's demeanor shifted immediately upon recognizing wealth and status. His aggressive posture softened into the practiced deference of someone who made his living serving affluent customers. "Tony Ricci, Ricci's Premium Motors," he said, extending his business card with renewed enthusiasm. "I was just trying to help your daughter earlier today with a more reliable transportation solution." "How generous of you," Victoria replied dryly, accepting the card without looking at it. "And what exactly did this generous solution involve?" Tony launched into his familiar pitch, describing the certified pre-owned sedan and flexible financing options with renewed energy, clearly believing that Victoria's obvious affluence made her a more promising target than her financially struggling daughter. The monthly payments would be quite reasonable for a family with steady income, Tony concluded, and the peace of mind that comes with dealer warranties and professional service support is really invaluable. Victoria listened with the patient attention of someone allowing a subordinate to fully expose their incompetence before responding. When Tony finished his presentation, she smiled with the cool precision of a corporate executive about to deliver uncomfortable truths. Mr. Ricci, I'm curious about something. What's your background in automotive engineering? Tony looked confused by the question. Well, I've been in auto sales for 15 years, worked with all the major manufacturers, completed extensive training programs in vehicle features and financing options. I see, Victoria said thoughtfully. And your technical expertise in transmission repair, hydraulic systems, mechanical diagnosis? I leave that to the service departments, Tony said, beginning to sense that the conversation was moving in an unfavorable direction. My expertise is in helping customers find the right vehicle solutions for their needs. Victoria nodded as if his answer confirmed something important. So when you dismissed Mr. Chen's ability to repair Elena's transmission, that assessment was based on your 15 years of sales experience rather than any actual technical knowledge. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Tony felt the ground shifting beneath his carefully constructed confidence. I've seen a lot of situations like this, he said defensively. I know how these things usually turn out. Do you? Victoria asked, her tone sharpening with the precision of someone who'd built a career on exposing incompetence. Because from where I stand, it appears that Mr. Chen accomplished exactly what he promised, while your solution would have trapped my daughter in years of debt for a vehicle she didn't need. Marcus watched the exchange with fascination, seeing Tony's aggressive confidence crumble under Victoria's professional demolition. This was corporate warfare conducted with surgical precision, each question designed to expose the weakness in Tony's position. Mr. Chen, Victoria continued, turning to include Marcus in the conversation, would you mind explaining to Mr. Ricci exactly what was wrong with Elena's transmission and how you repaired it? Marcus hesitated, uncomfortable with being thrust into the spotlight, but Victoria's expectant gaze made it clear that this was more than casual curiosity. This was a demonstration, a way of revealing the vast difference between Tony's superficial sales knowledge and Marcus's deep technical expertise. The problem was a cascade failure in the hydraulic control system. Marcus began, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into familiar technical territory. Contaminated fluid had caused valve body blockages, which created pressure imbalances that affected shift timing and torque conversion efficiency. Tony's eyes glazed over as Marcus continued, describing the systematic approach he'd used to identify root causes, the precision measurements required for proper valve body restoration, and the specific protocols necessary to prevent future contamination. The repair required complete disassembly of the hydraulic control assembly, ultrasonic cleaning of valve passages, replacement of degraded seals, and recalibration of pressure control solenoids, Marcus concluded. It's essentially the same methodology used in aircraft hydraulic system maintenance, adapted for automotive applications. Victoria smiled with satisfaction as Tony struggled to process the technical explanation. Aircraft hydraulic systems, she repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting, because Mr. Chen is the engineer who developed the Phoenix protocols that revolutionized hydraulic reliability in commercial aviation. The revelation hit Tony like a physical blow, the realization that he'd spent the afternoon dismissing someone whose innovations had literally kept millions of passengers safe in flight. Tony's face went through a series of expressions as the full weight of Victoria's revelation sank in. The confident dismissal faded first, replaced by confusion, then dawning recognition, and finally something approaching horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Phoenix protocols, he repeated weakly, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. You mean the airplane's safety systems? Victoria's smile was razor-sharp with satisfaction. The very ones. Mr. Chen's innovations are currently installed in over 60% of commercial aircraft worldwide. His hydraulic control systems have prevented countless mechanical failures and saved thousands of lives. Elena watched Tony's transformation with fascination and growing vindication. This was the man who dismissed Marcus as a backyard mechanic, who tried to pressure her into predatory financing while mocking the very expertise that was now being revealed as world-class engineering achievement. "I didn't know," Tony stammered, his sales training utterly inadequate for a situation where he'd catastrophically misjudged someone's qualifications. "I mean, he works in a garage, he fixes cars. How was I supposed to know?" "Perhaps by not making assumptions," Victoria suggested with Arctic politeness. "Perhaps by recognizing that competence doesn't always announce itself with expensive signage and polished showrooms." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the public vindication, even though Tony's earlier dismissal had stung more than he'd admitted. This kind of confrontation wasn't why he'd left aerospace. It was exactly the kind of ego-driven posturing he'd grown tired of in corporate environments. "It's not that important," Marcus said quietly, trying to defuse the tension. "I was happy to help Elena, regardless of anyone's opinion about my qualifications." But Victoria wasn't finished with her systematic demolition of Tony's credibility. "Actually, it is important because Mr. Ricci here was actively discouraging Elena from accepting help from someone infinitely more qualified than anyone at his dealership to diagnose and repair her vehicle." Tony's face flushed red as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. Not only had he lost the sale, but he'd done so while publicly dismissing someone whose engineering achievements dwarfed anything in his professional experience. "Look, I apologize if I came across as dismissive," Tony said, his voice taking on the desperate tone of someone trying to salvage an unsalvageable situation. "But you have to understand, from my perspective, I see a lot of people get taken advantage of by mechanics who promise more than they could deliver." And yet, Elena interjected, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. "Marcus delivered exactly what he promised, while your solution would have cost me hundreds of dollars every month for years." Victoria pulled out her phone again, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Ricci, I'm curious about something else. What's the current market rate for aerospace engineering consultation and hydraulic system design?" Tony looked blank, clearly having no idea how to answer a question so far outside his expertise. "I'll tell you," Victoria continued without waiting for his response. "For someone with Mr. Chen's qualifications and patent portfolio, consulting rates typically range from $300 to $500 per hour. For complex system integration projects, daily rates can reach several $1,000s. The numbers hung in the air like a revelation, transforming everyone's understanding of what had happened that afternoon. Marcus hadn't just fixed Elena's car. He'd applied expertise worth thousands of dollars per day to solve her problem, asking for nothing in return except the satisfaction of helping someone who needed it. $500 an hour, Elena repeated softly, looking at Marcus with new amazement. "And you spent your entire afternoon working on my car for free." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the mathematical reduction of his gesture to hourly billing rates. "It wasn't about the money. It was about getting you to that interview." Tony stared at Marcus, as if seeing him for the first time, his entire worldview about professional competence and success suddenly challenged by the reality of someone who possessed extraordinary expertise but chose to work in modest circumstances. "I don't understand," Tony said, his voice carrying genuine confusion now rather than aggressive dismissal. "If you're worth that much, if you've got all these achievements, what are you doing here?" It was a fair question, one that Marcus had asked himself countless times over the past 2 years. The answer involved grief and responsibility and choices made in the aftermath of losing everything that mattered except his daughter. "Sometimes the most important work isn't the most prestigious work," Marcus said simply. "Sometimes being where you need to be matters more than being where other people think you should be." Victoria watched this exchange with growing respect for Marcus's character. She'd encountered plenty of brilliant engineers over her career, but few who possessed both technical expertise and the wisdom to understand that success couldn't be measured solely in professional achievement. "That's a perspective the aerospace industry desperately needs," she said thoughtfully. "Too many of our engineers are so focused on advancing their careers that they lose sight of why the work matters." Elena stepped closer to Marcus, her voice soft but clear in the garage's sudden quiet. You saved my family's future today, not because you wanted recognition or payment, but because it was the right thing to do. I'll never forget that. The moment stretched between them, heavy with gratitude and mutual respect, while Tony stood to the side, struggling to process how completely his assumptions had been overturned. Marcus, Victoria said, her tone shifting into the persuasive mode of someone who'd identified a solution to multiple problems. I want to make you a formal offer. Marcus looked at her warily, sensing that Victoria Sterling didn't make casual offers. Sterling Aerospace needs a senior consulting engineer for our next-generation hydraulic control development program. Remote work, flexible schedule, project-based compensation at premium rates. You could continue running your garage while contributing to innovations that will shape the future of aviation safety. The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, a chance to reclaim his professional identity without sacrificing the life he'd built with Lily. Marcus looked around his modest garage, seeing it through new eyes as the weight of Victoria's offer settled over him. The familiar tools and equipment that had become his world suddenly felt like both a sanctuary and a limitation, representing safety and simplicity, but also the burial of talents that could serve a larger purpose. I need to talk to someone first, he said, glancing toward the office where Lily was still entertaining Sophia and Diego with her drawings and stories. Victoria nodded with understanding. Of course, this affects more than just your career. Marcus walked toward the office, his steps measured and thoughtful. Through the window, he could see his daughter explaining something technical to the other children, her young face animated with the same passion for understanding complex systems that had driven his own career before tragedy changed everything. Lily, he called softly, can I talk to you for a minute? She looked up from her drawings and came to him immediately, sensing the importance in his tone. They stepped into the quieter corner of the garage, away from the adults, but still within sight of the other children. Sweetheart, Marcus began, kneeling to her eye level. Remember how we talked about Daddy's old job, the one he had before we moved here? Lily nodded solemnly. The one where you helped make airplanes safer. That's right. Well, Mrs. Rodriguez's mother works for a company that does the same kind of work, and she's offered me a chance to do some of that engineering again, but from here, without us having to move or change our life. Lily studied his face with the perceptive intelligence of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions carefully. Would it make you happy, Daddy? The question caught him off guard with its directness and wisdom. I think it might, but only if it doesn't make you unhappy. She considered this seriously, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Will we still live here? Will I still go to my school? Everything would stay the same, Marcus assured her. I just spend some time each day working on airplane projects on my computer, in addition to fixing cars in the garage. Lily's face brightened with sudden understanding. So you could help people like Mrs. Rodriguez with their cars, and also help people who fly in airplanes? Exactly like that. She threw her arms around his neck with the fierce affection of an 80-year-old who'd reached a decision. I think you should do it, Daddy. You're really good at helping people. Marcus hugged her back, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For 2 years, he convinced himself that hiding his expertise was protecting Lily, but perhaps he'd been protecting himself from the risk of caring about anything beyond their small, safe world. When they returned to the group, Victoria was showing Elena and Tony something on her phone, her expression animated with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found exactly what she'd been looking for. Well, Victoria asked, reading the answer in Marcus's expression before he spoke. I accept, Marcus said simply, with the understanding that my daughter and this garage remain my first priorities. Victoria's smile was triumphant. I wouldn't have it any other way. Some of our best innovations come from engineers who understand that the most important systems are the ones that keep families safe and together. Elena stepped forward, her eyes bright with emotion. Marcus, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done today. You already have, he replied. You trusted me when you had every reason not to, and you gave me the chance to remember why I became an engineer in the first place. Tony, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the family consultation, cleared his throat awkwardly. "I owe you an apology," he said to Marcus, his voice carrying genuine regret. "I made assumptions I had no business making, and I was completely wrong about your capabilities." Marcus extended his hand with no trace of vindictiveness. "We all make assumptions sometimes. The important thing is being willing to change our minds when we get better information." Tony shook his hand gratefully, clearly relieved to be offered grace instead of the humiliation he probably deserved. 6 months later, Chin's auto repair had evolved into something unique in the automotive world. The modest garage still served its local community with honest, expert repair work, but now it also housed sophisticated engineering workstations where Marcus consulted remotely on cutting-edge aerospace projects. Elena had become a regular customer and friend, bringing her children for playdates with Lily while her perfectly maintained car served as a testament to Marcus's expertise. Her position at Morrison Industries had opened doors to advancement opportunities that would have seemed impossible during her desperate afternoons 6 months ago. Victoria's prediction about the value of practical engineering perspective had proven accurate. Marcus's combination of theoretical knowledge and hands-on experience brought fresh insights to Sterling Aerospace's development projects, leading to innovations in hydraulic reliability that were already being implemented across the industry. Tony Ricci had become an unlikely ally, referring customers to Marcus's garage when they needed repairs that exceeded typical dealership capabilities. His experience with misjudging Marcus had taught him valuable lessons about recognizing expertise in unexpected places. But the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The quiet mechanic who'd hidden his expertise behind modest circumstances had evolved into someone who embraced both his technical gifts and his commitment to community service. He learned that helping Elena wasn't just about fixing her car. It was about remembering that individual acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways that transformed multiple lives. On quiet evenings, when Lily was doing homework at her familiar desk and Marcus was reviewing aerospace schematics on his computer, the garage felt like exactly what it had become. A place where different kinds of important work coexisted, where expertise served both grand innovations and simple human needs. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know about a time when someone's unexpected kindness changed your life, or share your favorite moment from Marcus and Elena's journey.